4th year here, and it's been a joy. And so for those of you who I'm seeing again or seeing and have recently seen in class, it's good to see you. But for those who I'm meeting, this is just a wonderful event. It brings me a lot of joy to get to know people who also spent time in this place that's been so meaningful and so generous to me. And so I look forward to continuing to get to know you. And here at Dickinson in the philosophy department, I'm happy to report that we now have an ethics minor that's been instituted. We're doing a philosophy with children program. And we're also working across the curriculum to incorporate ethical reasoning into, I've worked with 26 different programs here at Dickinson so far. So the work that you are a part of building has continued. And I'm hoping that lunchtime conversations like this can be a part of that and really having some more intergenerational conversations in our community. So with that said, I have the honor of introducing our facilitator today. Ken Marvel graduated summa cum laude from Dickinson in 1974 with double majors in philosophy and political science. He received his law degree from Harvard Law School in 1977 and joined a business law firm in Dallas, where he became a partner in corporate mergers and acquisitions, as well as a key strategist for major litigation matters. His Dickinson education prepared him for many important roles throughout his career, including president of Fitz and Floyd, an international design firm based in Dallas, the honorary consul for Republic of Korea in Northern Texas for a term of 12 years, and has been a successful art dealer since 2003. Marvel also served on Dickinson's board of trustees. And so before I turn it over to you, Ken, just a few Zoom etiquette, right? So what I would ask is that when we're not speaking, that we go ahead and mute ourselves, and the mute button should be able to be found in the bottom left-hand corner. Like that. When you're muted, you'll see the little microphone muted next to your name. If you want to change your name in participants, or if you want to add the year you graduated, or if you want to add gender pronouns, you go to participants on your own name, select more, and it should give you the option to rename, though that's not necessary. And then the chat function is also here. So I'll put a hello in the chat. I know that I tell students when we're having conversations, we all have lots of good ideas all at once. Instead of jumping in, sometimes it's best to just write your idea down on your notebook in the classroom. Well, here we can do it publicly in the chat. So if you have a thought that you want to share with the group, but it's not yet your time to have raised your hand, then go ahead, put it in the chat or put questions in the chat. That'll be a nice way for us to keep a record. We're also recording today. And so we had some folks who were not able to make it. We have a record of this for them to watch. And then finally, on the, I guess it's the far right, you should have a section that says reactions on the bottom. And that's where you can find the raise hand. And when you click it, it should do this, like what we have in the top left-hand corner of my box right now.
Mine's almost in the center, so they're not all in the same place.
Oh, okay, great. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ken.
Well, terrific. Thank you, Amy. Well, I tell you, what's going on at the college today is pretty exciting. And I really do kind of feel like the slave boy today, because I'm having wonderful recollections of the delight and stimulation and excitement of the liberal arts education I had at Dickinson nearly 50 years ago. And that's not possible, but that's what the calendar seems to be saying. And I figured actually I'd have to wait for another lifetime before this would happen. So I am really thrilled that we are doing it today. The stated purpose of the conversation today is to kind of recollect Plato's Meno. It may also give us a very thoughtful opportunity to interrogate the question of virtue more generally and to test out principles suggested in the Meno against the realities and circumstances of contemporary life. And to start off then, I thought I would ask the question, why the Meno? why was a document drafted nearly 2,400 years ago chosen to be the subject for today's conversation? What application does it have to our lives today? And what should we do with it? So I want to throw that question out generally and see if any of you have answers, but maybe before I do that, let's ask Dean Allan and Professor McKiernan to give us their thoughts, just as preliminary as they may be. George?
One of my thoughts was what's important today is the question of whether we can teach virtue, since the Meno makes it very clear we can't. And we shouldn't ask that question because as Socrates made very clear, you can't answer the question about whether it should be taught or whether it's innate or whether it's a gift from the gods, unless in fact you know what it is. And I don't know what virtue is myself, but fortunately Amy does, so I'll defer to her.
Okay, Amy.
Okay, this has been really fun. It was good to meet you. I'm thinking in rereading the Meno about how Socrates encourages Meno to think for himself. So there are multiple points in the dialogue when Meno either pivots to cite Gorgias or cite the poet or cite someone other than himself, and Socrates keeps bringing him back to thinking for himself. And so I'm thinking today about challenges that we face to thinking for ourselves, temptations that might get in the way, technologies that might either facilitate or get in the way of us thinking for ourselves, and what that practice looks like. That's what I have on my mind.
Others chime in. Anybody have anything they would like to add to that? I'm not sure how I can tell.
I can see.
Oh, there's,
can Patricia?
yeah, there are hands up, and that was me putting my hand up.
Okay.
And I want to build on what Amy was saying. I don't think that Socrates has Meno think for himself. I think he employs what we now call the Socratic Dialogue, which is, it's not supposed to pull people along, but it certainly coaxes them along. And the questions that get asked lead that person toward thinking in a certain way. And that, I think, is very applicable today. It's what parents are supposed to do. It's what teachers are supposed to do. And also people who are, say, in the religious life, who don't want to be what we call preachy, but they do want to help people to understand for their own lives how to live a virtuous life.
Do we have other folks that would like to chime in? One of the questions that I think this implicates is whether in our current society, we are seeing a time in which goodness, virtue, arete, has been devalued, or perhaps it's just being redefined. If we think about a time in which we're bombarded with alternative facts, fake news, and a discussion, not even a discussion, just a statement of values that seem to justify lying and insurrection. Have we essentially entered a time where the good for a very large group of our population is being redefined? And if it is being redefined, what is required for these values to, in fact, elevate to the point that we would call them the goods. Anybody have thoughts about that?
Well, I think
My,
that, sorry.
Paul, go ahead.
I'm sorry. My instinctive reaction is, on a much larger scope, is calling into play the fundamental concept of the social contract. And that is a dramatic concern when you see people that form their own truth silos, and that denies scientific study, research, development, conclusion, that laughs at mathematics yet uses computers without understanding how they function. With those are givens in our generations, that is prior to the last few years, that there was a scientific understanding, if not what we call truth, that reason and not intuition, and that majority decisions don't mean that they were the right decisions, just that they were the majority decisions. That's the concern I think we're facing now. I'm not saying it's book burning, but it is disregard of critical thinking. In fact, gleeful disregard of critical thinking, which is antithetical to someone who's a philosophy major, unless they're in an Eastern philosophy. And that's it for another subject.
That's another subject, but I think that's very interesting. And there's been a great deal of discussion recently in the public forum about what is being called democratic backsliding. This notion that a population, even as ostensibly educated and rooted in fundamental social contract values, values of the American democracy, people are advocating publicly, loudly, a move toward autocracy. I couldn't believe what I was listening to last night on one of the shows, and these people were loudly advocating that in the United States there should be a coup, just like the one in Myanmar. And that position was advocated by a former general who was once the national security advisor of this country. I mean, is this a transformation or is this an aberration? I'd be interested to know, especially among, I see a couple of people who I think are probably students. I'd like to know your point of view on this. Would one of you like to respond? How about Christopher? This is called Socratic method, Christopher.
Understood. Yeah, I graduated last year, class of 2020. I'm currently at work right now, don't tell anybody. But my boss is a philosophy major herself, so she would be all for it. When we talk about democracy in Plato, what jumps to my mind immediately is his discussion. He sort of tiers different forms of government, and democracy is but one step away from tyranny. And I remember having discussions with professors just a few years back, reading, I know we're doing Meno, but reading the Republic and discussing the current rise of political figures and how it sort of corresponded to what we were seeing with President Trump at the time. I'm not sure I get the same vibe from the Meno, but that's just food for thought. Yeah.
What vibe do you get?
Yeah.
Was it Patricia who mentioned this dialogue where somebody mentioned that I get the feeling when Socrates is talking with people that he's already considered the points he's going to make. You could say somebody less agile is he, that he is sort of leading them on. He knows where he wants to go already, and it's clear from the way he formats his questions that when Meno answers incorrectly, it's not like a real discussion. He's sort of prodding him in the right direction.
I think the good thing to remind ourselves here, because it fits into the other discussion, is Meno is a self-centered individual who thinks he knows what the truth is. And that's the form of what we're confronted with, either because of leaders who think of that, but also ones persuading other people to support them only because they're saying it. So it's a question of truth in part, but it's the fact that, the question, Meno's question right off is, can we learn it, or is it born? Is virtue born? It's innate in us, etc. And Socrates says, yeah, but isn't the prior question what virtue is? And the result of this leading question, I think certainly he leads the questions, is to get to the point where it dawns on Meno that he doesn't know what virtue is. He says, oh, I know what that is. The question is, how do you learn it? So the Socratic method's primary purpose is to embarrass you, to break
Certainly, that
loose
happens in
all of
these
this
dialogues.
self-confidence that you have. And then, the torpedo fish, it stings, it hurts. It isn't fair for freshmen to be confronted with it. But then finally, it's from that he can say, well, I don't know either. You're not the only stupid person here. I also don't know what virtue is, but here, take my hand, and together let's walk down this path into an unknown path and try to see if we can figure out what it is. And I think Socrates really doesn't know.
And George, to that, in the text at 86C, I would just direct us to the passage that reads, I do not insist that my argument is right in all other respects, but I would contend at all costs, in both word and deed, as far as I could, that we will be better men, braver, and less idle, if we believe that one must search for the things one does not know. And the better, braver, and less idle stands out to me. It's not an answer to the question, it's about how, and it's done in community.
Well, we get back to something Paul was talking about. Socrates says, whatever is done with justice will be virtue, and what is done without anything of that kind is wickedness. So that is food for thought. What is justice? Is it simply that which is lawful? Does a society of statesmen and women decide what is lawful? Or does it require some aspect beyond the law of a sense of morality? So that morality becomes an underpinning of the law, or it becomes an underpinning of action taken in service of the good that may be within the law or without the law. I'm not sure that I get from the Meno how that is to be reconciled, but it does implicate the question whether the moral is something beyond mere belief. What do you think about that?
I was going to try to raise my hand before this, but I think what I was going to say is related. That as a therapist, I've often, as a therapist, it's a lot about inquiry and questions, the good therapist. And I'm not sure, I don't know that I was ever the best therapist, but I know people who've been. And that with the right questioning in a therapy setting, you can help someone come to their good, the good for them, for their loved ones, for their family, so that with careful, committed conversation, one can maybe get to that. there are two things there. One is that it doesn't mean the person's going to decide to do what they've come to understand might be best for them, because there's so many other factors. But it also, the other part of it is that there has to be a will to engage in that careful conversation. And I think to the point about what's happening in our culture now, we don't have any of that careful conversation. We don't have anyone who's willing to be subjected to it in a sense, so that we get to the logical conclusion of their positions or their behavior. I mean, it's right, it's sound bites, it's reporters asking questions, but in a sense only to trip someone up, but not to then ask them to really speak to the logical conclusions of what they're saying and proposing. And so therapy is what came to mind as a parallel from my work, but you need someone who's committed to participate in that process, and someone who's committed to asking the deep questions that can be hard questions as well.
I want to connect to something that both George and Amy said, going back to 86C. I think that Socrates is pushing on encouraging Meno to be curious. And I think that the dialogue, and maybe all the dialogues, are about curiosity when he says, I don't know, why don't you join me? We're better off if we think that we can get to something by searching for it rather than deciding that we can't get to something. And so the virtue here, and I'm using that in a different sense, I guess, the virtue here is curiosity, which we have, again, as Jesse was saying, have less of, perhaps, curiosity about why would someone think that way? Why would someone do that? Why would someone say that? We make assumptions about why they're doing that rather than interrogating it, investigating it, or being curious about the other.
Well, that certainly resonates. And I think it does suggest a way in contemporary society that a person who bothers to think about some of these issues and is not the beneficiary of a group as august as this can find companionship in inquiry. And I do think curiosity, if I were to say the one lesson I took away from Dickinson that has created the most joy in my life, it has been a desire to follow curiosity. And thank you, George, for that. Mark, I think you had your hand up. Can I call on you?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I also echo my fond memories of Professor Allan's classes, many of them that I enjoyed. I like the theme of justice. Being an attorney for 45 years, been near and dear. So I would invoke one of Professor Allan's favorite authors, Vico, who curiously had a nice critique, I think, of Plato at this point, where he faulted Plato for not making a turn from the ideal eternal to the more at hand social type of, in the ground. And I think that type of issue needs to be, threshed out as far as Plato too, where he ends up saying, well, it's a gift from the gods. It's a divine type of nature, which Vico doesn't disagree with, but he says you didn't make the turn. You have to come around to the social basis. And that's where also going into your fake news and difficulties, Vico comes in with the sense of community that with the factions developing these days has totally deteriorated. So, where are we? In the last cycle, the ricorso coming around? Is that where we turn? Or how can we build up the sense of community again? That's what I would like to see as a focus. Thanks.
that's absolutely brilliant. And someone on the chat made the observation, if I can find the chat again, that, let's see, Amy made this. Oh wait, that's not it. Where's the one about the public discourse yesterday? Oh, here it is. Here it is. It is this. That thanks to Biden's conversation yesterday in Tulsa, it gives us some hope that the undervalued features of equity, of equality, of comity, these things are beginning to be talked about in the public forum. He's going to have to take acting lessons to rival some of these people who are advocating armed insurrection. But at least the conversation is beginning to occur. We're hearing something about this. But I think the real dilemma that exists is, are we willing to say that our contemporary lives continue to honor these enduring values, but we also accept that in contemporary times, there will be situational modifications or situational adjustments. Certain things will be emphasized more, others less. I think that's the dilemma we're in.
So I think that brings the question, how do you teach in today's environment? And what do you teach? I think that one of the things that is intriguing to me is that there's several themes that have gone through this conversation repeatedly. One is, you started off, Ken, with this, are we redefining, a redefinition? Paul, you talked about the social contract. Haven't heard that. I live that way, but it's been a long time since I thought about Rousseau that way. Amy, you talked about thinking for ourselves. And so, when I was reading the Meno again, it really was more, not so much about the Meno itself, but what's happening in our society today. And so you've got fake news and you've got a number of other things. I personally don't understand how, whether you believe that knowledge is innate or not, how do you learn? One way of learning is certainly through what I call role model leadership, okay? But just modeling behaviors. And so in today's environment, we've got a number of different behaviors that are being modeled. And so at the essence, what's intriguing to me is what causes people to select the definition of, modeled behavior that they believe is right? And how do we in society get on a more common footing that we may have had in the past, or maybe we have believed we've had in the past, and there was just some underpinnings there that are only now coming to the surface. But how are people making the choices that they're making? And it's usually based on learning. So what kind of learning is going on? Is it really the case that the knowledge that we are seeing demonstrated today has been innate, and that's just really the way it is, and you can't learn anymore? That's what I find intriguing and at the same time quite disturbing.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful discourse on the various elements that the torpedo fish is so good at confusing us all when we're young. We have a current student here, Aaron, and obviously Nat and Christopher are I would think, fairly recent students. I'd be very interested to know, how do you take away from the learning you've had, the formal education, to enter life? Aaron, we'll start with you. What year are you?
Sure, I guess I'm a junior. I took the year off this year to do AmeriCorps, so I am kind of a junior. But I guess the way I see it is I get out of it what I put into it. I also think that it's not necessary. One point that I saw when I was reading this was that I found interesting was that Socrates seemed to write off that if there was no teacher, there was no learner. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think that the only way to learn is through having a teacher. Of course, I think it's helpful. And my teacher who has been on here, I think is wonderful. But I think that there are different forms of learning. And also when considering wisdom and knowledge, I think that that doesn't necessarily look a certain way. If you look at things like empathy, I think that could be considered a form of wisdom. And also a point that I wanted to make before was Paul was talking about the kind of individualism that we may be seeing that rejects the social contract and seems to consider good as an individualistic concept. But I think that I would argue that there's a difference between things that may benefit us as individuals and like traditional virtue. But the reason I think that's true, or at least the way the Greeks saw it, was largely due to the role that people had within society and the way that democracy wasn't considered a right. It was considered a privilege, or at least something that came with responsibilities. And so in that, it was considered a social good.
That's wonderful. I want you to keep talking for hours. I am delighted to hear that your takeaway, and I suspect heavily influenced by your AmeriCorps experience this past year, has left you with some of these impressions. And I think it's important, though, to also turn to the education side of this, the learning that takes place due to the interactions with people like Amy and George. And I want to ask them their thoughts on how do you teach students today anything beyond simply information. Information's important. We all went to college to get a lot of it, but we want to take away more than that information. We want to understand how that information should impel us to be good citizens when we leave school, and how it should help us to have wonderful lives well lived. And I'm wondering, George, you've taught so long and so many students.
And so long ago.
And it's, yes, hard to believe. But how did you reconcile the delivery of information with the ignition of imagination?
Well, I don't know that I particularly taught any information. No, I guess I did. But the thing is to get people to think that what it is we're dealing with is important, that it's interesting, that it's exciting, that you need to come to terms with grappling these sort of things. And only then is any of the information that you're teaching worthwhile. You know, if you start a philosophy course with we'll read a little Plato, and then the whole thing has to do with a true-false exam we're going to give. And a while later, you know, you have modeled an approach to reading literature. You've modeled exactly the wrong approach.
Right.
So that you should pull back from facts as such to judgment, interpretation of facts, to be seeking through the facts, because of them, even sometimes in opposition to them, to be coming to making the kind of judgments that are probably what value is all about, having insight into things. And then one of the key Socratic points is, and to realize that no matter what you come up, no matter what choice you make for your role model, that it's inadequate. That is, you're never going to get to perfection on anything. So you've always got to remain open to people who disagree with you, because you might learn from them. And I would try to convey that in one way or another. Nice thing about a small Dickinson class was the students could, after a while, be talking to themselves, and I just sit there and smile.
Well, one of the great things about a Dickinson class for me in the higher levels was you were forced to articulate. A lot of people were self-congratulating themselves on their intelligent thinking without exposing it to others and ready for ridicule. But when you sat in a 9-person seminar in somebody's house and had to read your 3-page memo, and you had Professor Foray making the first comment, you learned quite quickly you weren't as smart as you thought we were at night when you wrote that article, and you were forced to meet the test and know just why did you just say that, and how do you back that up, and where's the rebuttal. And I just want to add, when I took constitutional law at Fordham Law School, a Jesuit school, when I went to Fordham Law School, the constitutional law teacher would start teaching the course and people would be citing cases and they wanted the answer. And his ultimate answer to his teaching was always, who knows? And for those who took philosophy, they understood what was happening there. But for others, they just wanted the answer. And the answer was the next question.
Right.
That's great. That's great. It seems to me this dialogue has created many of the ideas that I think make for good teaching. And, you know, the college is very fortunate, certainly during our era, but equally so now, to have brilliant teachers who understand the power of discussing ideas, alternatives, that at the end of the day, there's a great deal of who knows that we leave college with, but we spend our lives dealing with those things and are equipped to do so in part thanks to the education we receive. Amy, you haven't spoken much. You're a wonderful teacher. I've heard that from several sources. How do you approach these issues as a teacher?
I'm happy to say, but also Nat, I wanted to give you the opportunity to jump in too first, if that sounds okay.
Sure.
Yeah,
Where
is that okay?
I can't find that.
Yeah, here I am. Hopefully you can see.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have Nathaniel on my screen. Nat is my nickname. You're welcome to call me either. I'm a student of Amy's. I'm just finished my sophomore year at Dickinson, so an active student. One of the things that strikes me most about the Meno, even before I reread it for today, was the first thing that popped in my head when I saw the email from Professor McKiernan was, oh, that's the dialogue with the slave boy example and the squares and the geometry. And I think it's just one of the most striking examples or like sections of philosophy for me in this process where Socrates can like walk us through this math that like at first read through might be difficult to follow like exactly what he's trying to demonstrate. And it seems like the slave boy is following along too, just as we might be like seeming to follow along. But then you get to the moment where he gets the slave boy to say 8 instead of 16 for the area of the much larger shape. And you're like, oh, wow. Like these impressions that I had and these true beliefs which I had don't necessarily come from any state of understanding. And I think it's that sort of position and coming to that makes me most worried, or I think gets my present day concerns most like reflected in the Meno, in that I think there are lots of cases in which our impressions and intuitions today on political issues, social issues, aren't necessarily founded in much, or we come to true what we think are true beliefs or impressions, and couldn't really offer reasons or explanations for them. And fortunately, we have times where we have a Socrates with us to sort of prompt the reflection. But I know that there are many times where I don't have a Socrates around to prompt that sort of dialogue.
He's
So-
probably about your age at the time that he wrote the Meno, by the way. It's one of his very early dialogues.
Mhm.
Oh my. Wow.
So I'm curious to hear from other people about how they sort of try to fight past their impressions and beliefs, and see the larger square for the area that it actually is, to extend the analogy. How do we get past just sort of following along and really evaluate the reasons, interrogate our understanding, prompt that reflection?
I think that's a great question. And I want to ask various of you how you've coped with that kind of a thing. Before I do, though, I want to follow up on Nat's point about true opinion. I've always been very suspicious of opinion in my life, though I can assure you that I hold many. But in the Meno, I found that as we got to the end of this extremely convoluted logical dialogue, or dialogue that involves logical argument, we suddenly get to an enormous tautology, which is good opinion. I mean, a true opinion is good, equal to knowledge, so long as it's true. Well, that's not very helpful. That's number one. Number two is, do you really think you can have true opinion that isn't informed by knowledge? And that knowledge comes from other people. It doesn't just, exist in the ether. So I hear a lot of people talking about this, both in this session, but also in the world, that their opinions are all that matter. And I blame Plato for giving them sort of historical credence in that view. What do you think about it? Who wants to respond?
I think that most people who have strong opinions probably have not read Plato.
You're probably right. Do you think maybe that's true with Trump? Possibly.
Well, reading is a prerequisite, however, probably.
So we need a replacement for the statues of Daedalus to make the trouble of true opinion is it runs away all the time. It's not available to you when you need it.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on your question, in that there's a paucity of people who are willing to think. And what I took away from Dickinson, not just in my philosophy major, was learning how to learn and having a love of diving into things to get as close to the origin of the thought or the statements as possible, so that I could build the logic that I learned how to use to come to my own conclusions. When I ask people I know to do this, it's like, that would be a torture worse than hell.
Curiosity requires courage.
I was just putting something in the chat, and I'll say it instead. So I think that too frequently, in my opinion, it's just my opinion, or everyone's entitled to their opinion, is used as a kind of shield, as if by saying that whatever follows does not have to be defended with evidence and is immune from counter argument. And so I think you're right, Patricia, that when people introduce this, but then think about, the alternative when spelled out is that you're moving through the world and living your life on the basis of what others have told you, and they may be right or wrong. You may get lucky and follow someone who, well, ultimately you would agree with, but I think you're right, and that people don't want to do that kind of hard work of thinking for themselves and grounding. It's tying down the statues, right? I love that image because otherwise they're so lifelike, they might run away.
Just want to throw out that Elon Musk is being inquired by the SEC because he put in tweets about statistics of how many cars we would roll out by the end of the year in a Twitter, but he ended it with comma, in my opinion. And that, he said, justified it. And the SEC is taking a look at that.
And just one more connection back to the Meno is that Socrates introduces the hypothetical as an alternative. So we can frame the argument as a hypothetical rather than stating it as if it is true, using those big words like all or none that we as philosophers know mean so much logically, and then tacking on, in my opinion, as if it then means that you're not responsible for it or accountable for your words. Jay, I see your hand. Could I bounce to you?
Sure. I wanted to make a comment about the true opinion because I liked the practical example that Plato gives where Socrates is illustrating, if you want to know the way to a certain place and you have information given to you by someone who does know the way and has actually been there, you can call that, in my true opinion, I know how to get to so-and-so. But I can't really call that knowledge until I've actually walked the road and known that it's the right road. Because someone could tell me how to get there and I'll wander off and say, oops, they gave me wrong information. So my opinion really can't be considered true until it's been tested against reality in some way. And I think the processes that people have described is a very good way of doing that. You have to be curious, you have to think for yourself and question what's going on, not just, as I so often do, blindly accept what someone tells me and just rush off after it.
That's the difference between using a GPS and using a map, I think. You can, there's been a lot of research about people who use GPS and can they get there again, people using a map and can they get there again, and people doing it themselves, taking the route and can they get there again. And the people who use the GPS have the least possibility of getting there again. So in some sense, I have moved into a kind of false knowledge or a belief that I have knowledge when I actually have none.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the other problem is with your testing the route, when you get home, there could be a big storm and the bridge is out. So the knowledge, and using the metaphor of Daedalus' sculpture, true belief is vulnerable to change, and there's a lot of it in this world. So I think one thing to caution our fellow occupants of this world is to be skeptical of what you think, unless you constantly engage in the process of examining it. And I want to come back to Nat's concern, because I think that's a real question, which is, once you leave the comfort and security of the beautiful Carlisle campus, how do you continue all this? I've been lucky. My partner is a Dickinsonian, and we've been together for nearly 50 years. So believe me, there's no shortage of questioning everything, I think. And I was lucky too, I guess, in this way, to be a lawyer. There's no shortage in a big law firm of people who think they know things, and you engage in lively debate constantly. But setting aside those things, and those of you that teach also have certainly a wonderful venue. My question becomes, what can we suggest to the Nates of the world and the other folks who have just recently graduated to help them in this process? Anybody have any ideas? John is a recent graduate. What are your thoughts?
I wish I had a better answer, but I was sitting here thinking about, that exact issue of, I remember when I was back at school, especially senior year when I was doing my thesis and everything like that, everything was just a constant question, was just walking around, questioning everything, continuously thinking about this. Excuse me. And I find that it's definitely much harder to do that once you graduate. And thankfully I am in a field, I work in mergers and acquisitions, and we are constantly having to think and consider and go, is this company a good fit? And, have all those thoughts. But it is difficult. And, I see it a lot too with people basically get their opinions, and we talk about true opinion. There's no shortage of opinions. I see a lot of people who just, when we're talking about politics with a coworker or something like that, the immediate response is, oh, well, I read so-and-so said this or so-and-so said that. And it's like, well, what do you think? I'm trying to prod people in, well, did you actually read it? Did you, read the actual speech, or did you just listen to what someone said about the speech? And I find that most people don't ever want to take that kind of last step. They just want to have their opinions told to them.
Yeah.
And it's definitely frustrating, but it's just, and then you're the jerk who's pushing, being pushy and questioning. I wish I had a better answer that you could find, a magical group of people to have these discussions with, but I think just kind of forcing through that and trying to find people to talk to, and, just kind of doing what you can.
In lieu of that, John, my suggestion is have the courage to be the jerk, because this will work out in the long run. It's very difficult in some environments to do that, but persevere, and I think you'll find that it is rewarding. Pat, go ahead, Patricia.
Can I say something short?
Sure.
I teach a workshop called Recognizing Nonsense, and it's basically about how to recognize logical fallacies. And the two classes of case study kinds of things that I use are politics and personal relationships. However, when it all comes down to it, if I want to talk to anybody, I found that being a jerk really doesn't work. People dig in their heels further. This is psychology coming into philosophy. And so instead, I can ask questions in a way that don't make people feel defensive. And that's how we make progress.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, when we say jerk, I think we're speaking metaphorically, but we also recognize that we've got to have the courage of our convictions. And when we find an environment where we can express them, we should not be reticent, but we should try to be diplomatic.
I think it's a little tough too, because I remember when you're in the setting of, a small seminar with 9 other philosophy majors who've been doing this for a few years, and you maybe have I always think back to the seminar I took with Professor Maher, and it was philosophy of language, and he was just relentless in a good way. I love the class. It was a fantastic memory. But I mean, you couldn't say one word without being questioned and pushed, to mean exactly what it meant and all the reasoning behind it. And, just when you thought Chauncey was on your side, he would turn around and then go, well, here's the 12 reasons why what you just said is utter nonsense. And I feel like it's easy as philosophy majors to get into those type of discussions and to be kind of ruthless with one another, and not have any hard feelings about it, to walk out of the class and, still be best friends with people you just, grilled for an hour and a half. But you can't really do that once you've graduated and you're in different settings. So you do have to kind of learn how to have those philosophical discussions in a new way.
I suggest beer.
I suggest owning that you were a philosophy major and that that's what you were taught to do. And so that, you know, like I had to do with my colleague, yeah, that I'm so philosophical because I was a philosophy major and I learned to ask a lot of questions. And forgive me if I'm not trying to insult you, but that's how I've learned to solve problems and think through things. And yeah, so just not own that we're jerks, but we own that we're philosophy majors, right?
You know, John, you selected mergers and acquisitions. You said that. That's finance. That's metrics. That's money is king. And I've been in those situations, the hostile takeovers. I would guard yourself carefully. Unfortunately, be careful amongst the people who come too close to you, as they say in the Roman language. You have to be very deft in the way you talk, because they're looking from a different mindset. They're not concerned with truth, virtue. Money is the game, and ultimately there is a way to create a dialogue of meaning, but with a few chosen people and in the right setting, not while the game is on. Because as you will find out or know, it's like war, and you have to stay focused. I mean, this takes us outside the rubric of what we were about, but I was a young man in situations similar to you, but the lawyer coming in, and that was good, because we're known as the no people, the lawyers. You're not the lawyer, so you're the finance guy. So you pick your right person to talk to at the right time, and you really can get a good dialogue, because they probably want to talk about it and never expose themselves to that kind of curious discussion. But you have to pick the right person.
Well said. Let's see, Mark, you have your hand up. Is there something you want to chime in on here? Oh, you're muted. Unmute Mark.
There we go. There. Okay. Yeah, just wanted to follow up. I thought the tie down comment was rather interesting, and wonder if I couldn't tie in to what I had said before, that there is a interesting, and as attorneys, I think we practice this to
He's frozen.
The case to render a decision.
He's tied down.
And okay, I'll try again.
Go
Am I
ahead.
coming through now?
Yes.
Okay. The tie down, I wonder if there isn't a thought to turn from the rules and principles, as we often do as lawyers, to the facts and circumstances and parties actually involved in the case to come up with a decision, and something that everybody can live with, in other words, until the next case. So I just wonder if that isn't something that was hinted at. I'm not sure Socrates specifies what the tie-in is specifically, but just curious that, is he bringing it around to the actual facts and circumstances, the everyday life, in other words, instead of just ideal forms that he's so well known for.
Plato,
George,
of course,
thanks.
Plato, of course, is writing the dialogue, but the character who comes in near the end and argues for any good gentleman in Athens knows what virtue is and all of that, is the person who was key in the vote to have Socrates killed. And so the dialogue ends with saying that, maybe there would be somebody among the statesmen who would actually have gained wisdom. And if so, he would be, like a shadow among others, but not like the others as the shadows. He's standing out among them, but maybe not. But if there could be one, it would be to the benefit of the city, because particularly if this one guy would have been paying attention to what Socrates was saying, he wouldn't have voted for his conviction, and the city would have been saved from the loss of its most important citizen. So I mean, there's practical stuff hidden in these dialogues that I think that Plato had in mind, whether Socrates did.
Interesting. Christopher, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I've got to go pretty soon. I have a meeting. I'd just like to quickly respond to Nathaniel, to Nat, about a point you made about how to remain inquisitive, continually better yourself. And part of it is, I speak as a 23-year-old. It's not like I'm one of the other alumni here, but how to continue your education and all that, being a good person. Part of it is surrounding yourself with good people. But you also made a comment about having a Socrates in your life. Sometimes Socrates is wrong, and you don't have to look past the Meno to get there. He talks about recollecting past. I mean, maybe this is right. The end of the argument with the square, they arrive on what is essentially like recollecting your past life's memories so that they reform in your brain, which I think is utter garbage. So the point is, you have to be your own Socrates, Nat. There's no way around it. But yeah, part of it is surrounding yourself with people that are willing to call you out. I've got to go. This was great. Thank you so much, Amy, for setting this up.
Great comment. Thank you. George, do you have something you want to add?
No, not particularly, though I would defend Socrates. I think he's just playing with the multiple reincarnations. Because that would be an infinite regress. You go back to learn your prior time and the prior time and the prior time. There's got to be some point at which you learn something, not from past memory. So he's just using this as a device to help the reader, I suppose, appreciate the fact that you have to turn to yourself to pursue these issues, have to come to understand them.
Yeah, he's a provocateur, and I think we have to look at him in those terms, but thank goodness for them. We're about out of time, but I cannot end without asking you all your reaction to the end of the Meno. After all this logical inquiry, we suddenly have a deus ex machina. What is virtue? Well, it's stuff God gives you. Thank you and good night. I mean, is that satisfying to you? Does anybody have a reaction? You think you get your virtue from divine sources?
Only the politicians who actually every once in a while stumble upon doing the right thing. It must have come from the gods, but that's not his message for us.
I would say
politicians.
that. Okay.
Excuse me, Pat.
Yeah, I don't think it matters whether there's some divine thing, or maybe the divine are the little neurons and whatnot. I don't think it really matters. I still think that we have to think.
Right.
And we have to analyze.
We have to.
I think that's a brilliant conclusion. Well, I think we're 7 minutes over time. We can continue conversation. If anybody has something they would like to see us explore, this has been a wonderful discussion. Gosh, I miss it. But Amy, what is our game plan here?
Before anyone, I have to get off as well as everyone else, and not to usurp the moment, Amy. But having said that, let me usurp the moment. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I probably spoke too much, and that probably is why I enjoyed it. But putting humility aside, I I really found it heartwarming and intellectually stimulating listening to every single person on, including those who are maybe younger than me, and those who certainly are younger than me, and certainly some of those that are nearing my grandson's age. But putting that all aside, I would welcome the opportunity of Dickinson considering doing a redo on this, although we won't be the same fresh faces. It'll be the second time around, but maybe we can get some other people on it. And because I just listen and I hear people who have also been bitten by curiosity that hasn't left them throughout their life. And they want to hear of other people that have questions and don't have the answers and are willing to hear other people and stay within a train of reasoning that they started with. And if that's possible, I would appreciate that. And I will say, I appreciate the presenter and the time he must have done in preparing for this. But I have to be honest when I say, when you said Dr. Allan was going to be on, which to me is Professor Allan, I had to be
Always
on.
Professor Allan.
I had to be on this out of respect. And I will always be on this if Professor Allan is somewhere near there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Amy, are we ready to sign off, or did you have something else you'd like to accomplish here?
So I have a question before you do that. For some of us who may not have seen, and I don't think of him as Professor Allan, I think of him as Dean Allan first, although he was my professor. How might we be able to get in touch with you, Dr. Allan, if we wanted to after this discussion?
Send me an email.
Okay.
To George Allan at verizon.net.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Anybody have anything else?
Just that it sounds like there may be interest in doing something like this again. And I'd be happy to see that happen. Throughout the year, we were doing some Zooms with recent alums just to stay in touch during the pandemic. And we were reading New Yorker articles or watching films or listening to podcasts. And so
That's great.
yeah, if we wanted to do something, once a month, I would be on board for that. As an ethicist, I frequently say in class that ethics is life's work. And I think this conversation today has affirmed to me that ethics and philosophy are life's work, right? And I'm proud to be doing it with you, but also to know some of you. Like as I sit here in East College, where you may have been, right? I like that sense of community, and I'd like to continue to see that built and get back in touch with some of you. So please feel welcome to email me as well, just to introduce yourself or let me know who you are and where you are, because I would be happy to plug you in and get you talking to some of our current students.
What's your email?
It is, I'll put it in the chat.
And while Amy's doing that, I'll just echo, I'm Liz Toth from Alumni Relations, and I've been thoroughly enjoying listening to all of you. But if you have any questions or ideas for future conversations or topics that could be discussed in this forum, or if you would like Amy or George's email addresses in writing, please feel free to contact me or my office. You have our contact information because that's how you got the Zoom link. So we're happy to be there to assist with anything or future ideas.
Well, great. Any other questions or comments?
I think just a big thank you to you, Ken. Thank you for moderating this, for making this gathering possible. I really appreciate you bringing us all together.
Well, it was fun and particularly delightful to have the input from students, recent grads, who just, frankly, that just blew me away. I mean, if the whole student body is like them, keep it a secret. I mean, you guys are very impressive. And the grads who spoke, the majors who were kind enough to join us today. Wow. I have new confidence in the possibility of a better place called the world. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This was wonderful.
Yeah, we should awkwardly, like Socrates, be like, all right, well, I'll see you later.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Good to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.